Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the Markham Woods Seventh-day Adventist Church. This afternoon, we're glad that we're joined by panelists that I'll let Jim Coffin introduce us to in a moment. First of all, I want to introduce Jim. He's the Executive Director of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, and he has gone to the trouble of coordinating all this, and we very much appreciate it. For those of you that have not been a part of any of the other series that we've held here, this is a continuance of that, and unfortunately it was put off for a little bit. We're thankful that it was finally possible that we could have it. We will go through, and I will have Jim introduce the rest of the panelists after we have an opening prayer here. But prior to that, I did want to also inform those of you that at the end, there will be an opportunity for a Q&A session. We'll have roving mics within the audience. And for those of you that are online, we welcome you as well. And if you'd like to send in comments, questions via YouTube, you can do that, and we will try to relay those up to the stage for addressing as well. With that, if you'll please bow your heads, we'll have a quick word of prayer. Our Father, we thank you this afternoon that we can come together and discuss very detailed and pressing issues, and from a varied number of areas that each of us needs to understand one another's perspectives. And we thank you for each of these gentlemen who have taken their time to provide us those perspectives. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Thank you, gentlemen.
It's a pleasure to be here. Granted that I was the pastor of the church here for 20 years, I've stood here once or twice before. And so it's a pleasure to be back home. I've been away for 10 years now with the Interfaith Council, and I'd like to introduce the people we have participating. And I would just mention that really there are kind of two organizations that worked a little bit together and that we represent that are involved here. The first one is the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. And the second one is the Central Florida Commission on Religious Freedom. And some of us are in both, and others are in one or the other. And then some are just supporters. So anyway, on my left is Nav Khalsa, and you would guess his faith tradition by his turban. He's a Sikh. And he has served as the National Director of SALDEF, which is the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and he currently is serving as the Southeastern Director for that organization. And that's a Sikh advocacy group, but they're also very concerned about civil rights and human rights in general, whether it's for Sikhs or anyone. And so, Nav, thank you very much. And he's on the Traditions Council of the Interfaith Council. In other words, he's a Sikh representative on the Interfaith Council. And next to him is Imam Muhammad Musri. And Imam Musri is Muslim, and so he made the greatest sacrifice to be here because he's fasting because it's Ramadan. And so he's expending this energy and getting a little bit drier because of the fact that he hasn't had water since sunrise today. So I feel very honored that he would make it here at this time when there's so much going on, and it's actually in the wind down right now. And so there's probably even more than usual because Ramadan will end. When is it, Muhammad? Tomorrow. And Monday is the back to normal. Okay. And Muhammad Musri he's known in many areas, and in fact you will see him interviewed a lot on national television when it comes to talking about Islam. And he, in this community, was very well known for the Friends Talking Faith on the NPR affiliate here, and he represented Islam there. So thank you very much, Muhammad, for being here. And to my right is David Williamson, and David is the co-founder, I guess I should say, of the Central Florida Free Thought community, which covers quite a range of thought that wears different labels. such as it could be atheist, it could be agnostic, it could be skeptic, it could be free thinker, and quite a long list of people who wear different labels, but they kind of come under that umbrella. And David is a very strong advocate for the separation of church and state. And he has actually been involved in lawsuits where there have been infringements, and I would say he has a good enough track record that people don't like it when they when they see they're being called to task by David Williamson. And so anyway, we're delighted to have him here, and he is actually our secretary of the board for the Interfaith Council, because the Interfaith Council is fairly broad in its outlook, and while humanism is not a faith tradition, it is an organizing principle of life. And so that's kind of the way we define faith, more so than belief in a deity, is an organizing principle of life that one follows. So David, thank you very much for being here, and he actually has brought a number of people from the Central Florida Free Thought community who are here today. And so we give you a special welcome and appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to come. And next to David is Sam Friedman. And originally, when we advertised this program for January 8, before there was the surge, his brother Ben Friedman was going to be the Jewish representative. And then when we had to change the date, Ben couldn't be available, but he was so kind and gracious that he lined up his brother to be here. And so you can see they have a very good relationship within the family. And anyway, Sam is very active in the Jewish community. He's on the Jewish Federation Council, is that how you call it?
So I'm the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council here in Central Florida. I'm the director of Hillel at Stetson University, which is the Center for Jewish Life on campus.
Okay.
I serve on the board of the Jewish Federation of Volusia and Flagler counties, and I'm my mom's favorite son.
And how many sons are there?
4.
4, okay. And he's Jewish, you got that idea, serving on all those councils, he's Jewish. So that's the group of people who we have here. And the format that we're going to follow is that each of us, let me just make one more apology. Reverend Dr. James Morris, an African-American who is Christian Methodist Episcopal and is the senior pastor at Carter Tabernacle Church, was planning to be here. And I really wanted him to be here because he has a long history in a number of areas, in the whole area of religious liberty, also in civil rights. And he, for a number of years, was a state House of Representative member in the state of Missouri. So he has just a wealth of experience and has done a lot of interfaith things as well. And he planned to be here, but unfortunately there was a death in the church, and the only time that the family was able to come together so that they could do the funeral was this afternoon. And so he has had to bow out. So I'm going to tell you later what he would have said. At least I'm going to give you the sentence that he gave me, the one sentence. So the format that we'll follow is that we will each take about 7 or 8 minutes to talk and kind of give an overview. And in that overview, we're going to talk about the 2 things that are of deepest concern from the perspective, from the respective perspective of each of us. And there may be some overlap. Probably there's a good chance there will be. These may be on totally different areas because we all live life in our own realm, and we have certain concerns and certain things that are impinging upon us. And so there can be some great variety there. I will keep time just so that we don't run over time much. So those of you who are presenting, I'll kind of give you if you see the one finger, that means you've got one minute to go, but approximately 7 or 8 minutes is what we'd like to do. After that, then you can ask questions, and I think that provision has been made for questions to be sent in online. If there are people online who want to ask questions, you can direct them to the group, or you can direct them to an individual. Typically, it works better if you direct it to an individual, and we get that one person's answer as opposed to everybody going over the same ground. That can get a little bit boring, and so we'll try to keep it moving a bit faster than that. So, we didn't organize ourselves ahead of time as to who goes first, and so I'm just kind of looking here, and Judaism is the oldest religion represented, and so it seems like they should have preeminence. And okay, David disagrees.
David,
with
go
that?
first.
Yeah, David. Okay, David wants to go first.
We'll have a debate about the oldest tradition another time.
Okay,
Go
well,
ahead, Sam.
but since you've objected, we're going to honor your objection.
Okay.
And we'll let you go first.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Be careful what you wish for. Good afternoon. First, a huge thank you to our host organizations, the handful that Jim mentioned. Thanks for the opportunity to air our grievances this afternoon. We don't do enough of that, it seems. There's not a lot of complaining in the world, is there? But at least we're not on social media here. That'll be later when we watch this on YouTube. Seriously, though, you being here at a forum like this, where you get to hear mostly about how other people perceive, is an indicator of your compassion, your interest in understanding people in your community. So I commend you for that. Thank you very much for attending and tuning in online. I don't have two specific religious freedom cases that concern me because there are root causes that I want to talk about that can provide a better understanding of what's at stake when people compare their own standing in a community to those of people of other faiths that rather than their own. So of the two concerns I have, first, let's talk about a recently popularized and often unpopular term, privilege. Too often, some confuse their rights with a privilege they have, resulting in some having an advantage over others simply because others are in the minority or the majority. From a religious perspective, this is of greatest concern to non-Christians because in a Christian majority, those of us who are not Christians are often made to feel unwelcome, usually accidentally. This happens when those in a majority don't realize the social privilege from which they benefit. In every setting we find ourselves, no matter what that might be, there are some in the group with social privileges that others don't have. Privileged groups can be advantaged based on dozens of factors, and not always those that stem from being a minority or even a position of oppression. Keep in mind that these social privileges should be understood, but they are not always a problem that needs to be fixed by regulation or even rules of decorum. In other cases, however, they do demand action to address inequities that have taken hold. Those of you taking notes who are unfamiliar with the privilege that you may have, no matter who you are, take a few minutes this weekend and Google the term social privilege. What can happen when anyone has an advantage in a particular forum is they can easily forget that that advantage exists, so much so that they unknowingly assume they have a position they have earned or a right that is protected in law, when in fact, they are simply in a majority who have intentionally or unintentionally crafted a situation where those people have a privilege that others do not. And here are a few tests to see if you have religious privilege. Are your religious holidays recognized by our government and business organizations? Can you frequently find your faith depicted, often accurately, in your opinion, in the various forms of media? Can you easily find like-minded houses of worship a short drive from your home? Are there good and helpful institutions and even characterizations of things in society that are attributed to your religion but not others? There's an excellent list of more of these at Arizona State University's Project Humanities initiative. The key here is not that the majority must be stopped from making decisions or exercising their rights. That's not what I'm talking about. The very reason we have a Bill of Rights, though, amended to our Constitution, and particularly the First Amendment, is to prevent the tyranny of the majority. Without it, we would have a state religion, blasphemy laws, and media reports of only what the government would like. And the point is that we should all be concerned when a majority has free reign over so many aspects of public life that they will take unknowing advantage when they participate in government as an elected official, employee, volunteer, or even a constituent. So what does it look like when someone has religious majority and forgets that they have privilege? This might be the elected mayor of Apopka participating in a prayer breakfast, bearing his official title and thinking it's an appropriate use of that title, the title of the city leader. This could be assuming the Christian cross is an appropriate symbol for the city of DeLand, or that should be propped up and placed in Longwood City Hall. This might be a local pastor at Edgewater High School deciding, along with the football coach, that their religion is the one that the team will practice. Or this might be the members in a community deciding what books other kids get to read by attempting to remove the ones they don't like from public school libraries. All of these are not violations of law, but they are clear displays of privilege. So my first concern, again, is confusing privilege with a right or liberty. My second concern is the presumption by some that secular government is the same as one that is hostile to religion or that promotes atheism. Now, this may not seem like the absurd argument that it is if you don't give it much thought, but for this to be true, that secularism is equivalent to atheism, a bowling league that doesn't begin its matches with a prayer must be promoting atheism. The work teams that regularly meet at your place of employment that don't start with scripture readings or religious chants must be mad at God. If your favorite restaurant or grocery store doesn't have religious symbols on the wall or religious books in the book section, like Publix, it must be hostile to religion too. But the fact is that neutrality towards religion is not the same in hostility. We don't need an open forum for religion and government. We need government to stay out of the religion business, and we need religion to stay out of government. That does not mean religious people should not be in government. It simply means that people of faith who work in government cannot violate constituents' freedoms by using the authority of their position to pressure employees, students, or any constituents into supporting or participating in their religion. As is the case with every issue we begin to understand better, as we learn and care more about it, if religious liberty is important to you, keep coming to events like this, keep engaging with people you disagree with, and keep seeking to understand how your story isn't the only story. We live in a pluralistic society that in theory seeks to be inclusive of everyone, but that doesn't simply happen because a bunch of white, presumably straight, mostly religious men said and did some things in the Pennsylvania State House 230 years ago. We're a work in progress. Our union isn't perfect yet, but if we keep engaging with those whom we disagree on fundamental issues like this, it can become more and more perfect when we do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sam Friedman. As Jim said, actually, David's wife, Jocelyn, made a joke that I was representing the millennial community here also. So I want you to know that I'm fighting the urge to take a selfie. So when I come to speak at events like this, I always like to clarify something. And the best way that I can do that is with a very old, very tired joke. So they say that if you ask two Jews their opinion, you will get no fewer than 3 answers. So everything that I'm going to say today is my opinion. And it will be okay if you leave here and you ask your Jewish friends to clarify what I'm saying or to validate or their thoughts and they disagree with me. That's totally okay. And just know that they're wrong. So when I think about the two sort of pressing religious liberty issues in the Jewish community right now, the first, and I think the most obvious, is the incredible increase we've seen in overt anti-Semitism. So just this week, the ADL released their annual hate report, and they reported that anti-Semitic hate crimes in the United States are up 34%. 34%, and we're talking about crimes. We're talking about laws that have been broken. And that, as you can imagine, is a huge source of concern. And what that doesn't include is my other concern, which is the sort of covert versus overt anti-Semitic things that we're seeing. So what do I mean by that? So roughly a month and a half ago, on Alafaya Trail down by, I can't remember the name of that development down there, the big shopping plaza, there were actual neo-Nazis in Orlando. There were flag-waving neo-Nazis 10 minutes from the University of Central Florida that has 6,000 Jews on campus. And this was in broad daylight. This was not at a private meeting held at someone's house. They weren't wearing hoods. This was overt, and this was public, and this was intentional, and hundreds of people drove by it. And that is scary. And the other thing that's scary, but that's overt, right? Like, we know what that is. We can see that, and we can avoid that, and we can do whatever we want to fight that. But the other religious liberty concern for myself, and I think for the majority of the Jewish community, is how we are not, oftentimes we feel we're not allowed to define our own oppression. So for many communities, if they say, like, this is not okay, we believe them because we're supposed to believe them. You go to the source. And you don't need to look any further than the United States government to see the things like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm not going to get political, I promise, referring to Jewish space lasers, and we can say, like, that is overt Jewish, that is overt anti-Semitism. And mostly I was offended because I'm pretty active in the community and I don't know anything about these space lasers. But also with the appointment of Anthony Blinken, the Jewish Secretary of State, and the concerns that were brought up about dual loyalty and about whether he could actually put the United States first. And that is the kind of covert dog whistle anti-Semitism that has the majority of the community concerned, where everybody, or not everybody, but where when we bring it up, oftentimes we're told, well, that wasn't really that big of a deal. And that's my two concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll go with Imam Muhammad Musri, because definitely Islam is older than Sikhism, and so no argument there. Okay, thanks, Muhammad.
Thank you. And I have to say, Sam, you look nicer than Ben. You have more hair. So say hello to him. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Jim, for organizing this and getting us together. The issue of religious freedom impacts us every day, here at home and globally. And I've worked with these gentlemen for many years to try to promote it at home, but also I've worked with many others on the national level to promote it internationally. People like Joel Hunter, Dr. Joel Hunter, where we traveled together across the world to promote harmony and to promote religious freedom for Christian communities in Pakistan, in Central African Republic, other places, because we feel that while, David, we complain about what we have here, it's nothing to be compared to what's going on elsewhere. The U.S. still stands as a beacon of freedom, religious freedom enshrined in the Constitution, and the efforts of government officials all the time and courts to protect religious freedom is, in our world today, second to none. So, but that doesn't mean we should not keep getting better and keep everything in check. But as Sam also said, there are undercurrents that have surfaced that we have to be concerned about. And if when Anthony Blinken goes to China and say, hey, what are you doing to the Chinese Muslims in East Turkestan and these so-called educational camps where they put millions of men in Nazi-style torture camps and confiscate their properties and their homes and so on and so forth, trying to erase their Muslim identity and their ethnic identity as East Turkestanis and make them communist and make them, Han Chinese, basically. And they start pointing fingers at us. The Chinese officials, they tell Mr. Blinken, don't come and lecture to us, look what you're doing. So it behooves us to make sure that in the U.S., we all work together to defend the religious freedoms of everybody so nobody can point at us. So we can, tell people and nations and leaders who are crossing those red lines that we have a moral authority to speak about religious freedom. And, the Biden administration has gone out of its way to demonstrate to the world and to the American people that they are diverse, they respect all faith traditions, and recently they appointed a Muslim lawyer who was formerly counsel to President Obama as the U.S. ambassador at large for religious freedom, who took, after Obama's appointment of a rabbi, another good friend, Rabbi David Saperstein, who also was a champion working hard, traveling internationally to defend religious freedom. And the U.S. State Department has organized over the years many conferences, international conferences, to press on leaders, world leaders, to respect the religious freedom of their people. And I participated in many of these conferences and applaud our government for that effort. Because if you look at many conflicts around the world, the underlying issue is religious freedom. Take India, for example, now. The government of India has been, and India is technically the largest democracy, but they're not acting like one right now. And the nationalist government there, Hindu government, has been issuing many laws, such as if you are a Muslim Indian, you are not really Indian because India is a Hindu nation and you should leave. You should go to Pakistan or Bangladesh or somewhere. You're not entitled to those same rights. And officials in the government, the Modi government, has expressed that openly. And they have sat and encouraged Hindu nationalists who act like the Nazis, have the same symbols, the same language, and the same threats, and they have acted violently against Muslims, burned mosques down, burned their homes. They, there are tons of videos online you could watch and be horrified by how people would threaten and take the lives of people, beat people to death on the street just because simply they are of a different faith. And they're doing that not just to Muslims, they're doing it to Christians, and they're doing it to Sikhs. And our government needs to put more pressure on India to address this, because this could spiral out of control. Because there are 300 million Muslims in India. They are still a minority in 1.4 billion people in that nation. But that's not a small number. If you push 300 million people to the edge, they may react. So it is in our best interest as a country to help India realize that this is not good for India. It could lead to civil wars, could lead to division, it could, but in the current global rearrangement, the US versus China, we need India on our side, we are looking the other way. And that's, the government of India is taking advantage of that. Recently, high courts in India will not allow Muslim women to wear headscarf to go to college. If you wear a headscarf, you cannot go to college. Which I don't see what's the connection between the headscarf and the college. And for decades or hundreds of years, they wore the headscarf and went to The same problem is happening in other democracies. We saw recently, a week ago, in the French presidential debate, that when Marine Le Pen is going on and saying she wants to, if she wins, she would issue a law to ban Muslim women from wearing headscarf in public anywhere. And again, what does that have to do with that? So there are many concerns. In a very complicated world we live in, I think we start at home by doing this work, and that's why I'm very involved, and then we need to take it globally to prevent, conflicts, unnecessary conflicts. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers for putting this together, the Interfaith Council and Mr. Coffin here as well. The topic today is religious liberty, and Sikhism historically has been known for defending not only the religious liberties of Sikhs, but those of other religious groups as well. In fact, two of the Sikh gurus basically gave their life for other faiths in India when they were forming in those days. In standing up for their religious beliefs, they have strengthened the shield of religious liberty, protecting every American's First Amendment right to freedom of conscience. In the United States, many non-Sikhs do not understand the deep religious significance of the outward Sikh symbols of faith of a Sikh, the Articles of Faith, and they find the distinctive appearance strange and also even threatening. This was especially evident at the wake of 9/11 during the terrorist attacks. Even though the Sikhs were not involved in those attacks, some Sikhs were subjected to violence or discrimination because of nothing but their appearance. With their distinct appearance and religious practices, religious accommodations need to be made. As a result of 9/11, after the events of 9/11, one of the main things that we had to deal with was hate crime. The amount of hate crimes against Sikhs went from almost negligible to very high on the scale, almost overnight, because of what people perceived that somebody with a turban must be somehow related to those people that committed the acts of violence, or the act of terror. And unfortunately, we are 2 decades later in this country since 9/11, and we are still dealing with the aftermath of that. We are still dealing with a lot of hate crime still going on against Sikhs as well. There are bullying in schools, there are bullying at the workplace, people get beaten up in restaurants, other places, just in general. And that has been ongoing for a while now. And unfortunately, this is something that we are trying as a very small community in the country. There are only like about 500,000 in the US, and we're trying very hard to try to educate not only government officials, the TSA, law enforcement, and also employers on who a Sikh is. And because of that, we have had a lot of related discriminations that have been taking place, especially like in the workplace. There have been a number of cases involving religious rights. There are a lot of national Sikh organizations that have been working to address this matter and lobby the US Congress to pass legislation guaranteeing the right of individuals to wear religious headwear. Article 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits employers from discriminating on basis of religion. Title VII also requires employers to make reasonable efforts to accommodate employees' religious needs as long as the accommodation does not impose an undue hardship on the employer. Sikhs are known for their military and law enforcement services around the world. In fact, some of you might know about the contributions of Sikhs during World War I and World War II, and during the times in Britain as well, in India, I mean, where the British hired these Sikhs as soldiers. The U.S. military, since 1984, has come up with a grooming standard that has barred Sikh men from joining the military because of the headwear, the turban, and also the uncut hair and the beard. Uncut hair and the uncut beard is actually critical part of Sikhism, if most people are not aware of it. So it is only now that there are some Sikh groups that are now working on getting Sikhs back into the military, and there are a number of them that have started slowly coming back into law enforcement as well. In fact, we are having the first Sikh gentleman that's going to be serving on the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, I believe in the next 8-10 months or so. In Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Nebraska, there have been laws that prohibit public school teachers from wearing distinctively religious clothing. This not only affected Sikh men with their turbans, but also Muslim women wearing the hijab as well. And this is something that Sikh organizations are fighting to correct, for not only for Sikhs, but for any other folks that need such a religious accommodation done as well. The conflict over Sikh religious practice can arise in a number of settings. Employees barring employees from wearing beards. A prison may require inmates to keep their beards or their hair short. A school may treat the kirpan as a dangerous weapon. A kirpan is actually like a second amendment to Sikhs. Basically, Sikhism originated during a very tough time in India when they were persecuted from all sides. So in order to stay alive, they said that if everything else fails, it is then justified to pick up the sword as a sword of justice. It's meant for defense, and it's still something that we are supposed to wear. Both men and women have that as part of their uniform as well. So in schools, some schools have made accommodations where they have made it where the kirpan is not accessible and it's welded onto the scabbard of the kirpan itself.
1 minute.
And of course, we also know about other challenges as well. The other thing that we have is about discrimination in service as well, which is access to service. You'd have examples like non-service at the bank, or no service at a restaurant, or being asked to leave even. The TSA screeners in the past have been asking Sikhs to remove turbans at the airport, and that's because they are not aware of what a turban represents, and they think that there's something to hide in there. Sikh groups have been providing training to them to be more sensitive. Law enforcement also is at fault here. Oftentimes when they would arrest or talk to a Sikh of interest, they would often violently grab and pull the turban off their head, which is akin to a strip search. And a lot of times it's done in public as well. And that's also another area that a lot of Sikh organizations, especially SALDEF, the organization that I'm with, is involved in educating law enforcement officers and the TSA on the articles of faith. Thank you.
I'll just pull up quickly the sentence that was sent to me by Reverend Dr. James Morris, and tell you what he would have talked about. This is just the topic of what he would have talked about. But the two things that he mentioned that were of deep concern to him were, one, the right to exercise one's faith free from persecution or encroachment by any government or religious body in the name of religion. So that's government interference or religion interfering with other religions in such a way that it poses problems. And two, institutionalized religious biases which stand on the premise that if you don't worship the way we worship, then your worship is inadequate, unacceptable, and a heresy. And so those are the two things that he would have addressed had he been here, but he's not here, so you're stuck with me. Okay, so anyway, the two things that concern me the most, without question, the number one thing is Christian nationalism. And I believe you've already had a presentation and some discussion in the past months in this congregation relative to that. The thing that concerns me about Christian nationalism is that we listen to what the Imam said about what goes on in India and the fact that there are certain things that are denied to non-Hindus because of the fact that they're not Hindus, and more there's a Hindu nationalism that is emerging there. And of course, it's always easier for us to look at what's going on in another place than it is to look in the mirror and see what's going on with us. And likewise, in Myanmar, for example, the Buddhists against the Muslims. There's a Buddhist nationalism that's taking place. And there have been Muslim majority nations where there is a Muslim nationalism that has led to the persecution of other people, and they're treated as second-class citizens. And I forgot to start my clock. So anyway, we'll say that I've gone for about 3 minutes. How's that? And then we'll make sure that I'm very, very good after that. So the idea of Christian nationalism has been growing dramatically. And so there is a move afoot to sort of say, we started out as a Christian nation. And we want to return to being a Christian nation. And the reality is, in one sense, we never started out as a Christian nation, but we did start out with some very fundamentalist Christians who wanted to have a kind of a Christian society. And it didn't work. And so when we look at Christian nationalism, we're actually looking at we're looking at something that has been tried and failed. And I'm talking particularly about the Pilgrims when they came. The Pilgrims came in 1620, but the Pilgrims didn't come directly from England, or the bulk of them didn't. They actually had been persecuted. They were separatists, so they were persecuted by other by the Church of England, actually. They were persecuted in Britain, and so they said, we've got to do something that's better. And so they went to Holland. And in Holland, there was considerable religious liberty, and quite a lot of pluralism, actually, and people had the right to teach and to speak and to share their perspectives on life. And these fundamentalist Christians found that very difficult to deal with. And they said, you know, if our children are going to listen to all of the isms that are out there, if they're going to hear all the perspectives, then we're going to run into some danger. And so they said, let's go to a place where we can control both the societal issues, as well as the religious issues. Robert Ingersoll, the great agnostic of the 19th century, the latter half of the 19th century, said, and I think it's very perceptive, the Pilgrims left England because of religious persecution. They left Holland because of religious liberty. They didn't like the idea of religious liberty. And so they came here, and they actually set up a system where there was a theocracy, or as near to a theocracy as you get. And there was a blending of the governmental things and religious things. Well, there were renegades in their group, one particularly by the name of Roger Williams, a preacher. And Roger Williams said, no, that's not the way it should be. We actually should have the two separate. There should be to use the terms that David would prefer, a secular government, and then religion can do what it wishes to do over here, but the government needs to be secular. And Roger Williams was an advocate of that, and that went over like a lead balloon. And so as a result of that, he had the misfortune, or maybe the good fortune, depending on how you want to look at it, of being both banished and excommunicated. And so he thought, well, I can't work here in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It's too big a problem. So he went back to England, and he was trying to get a charter to start his own colony, which ultimately he did, and that was Rhode Island. And but while he was over in England, and this stretched out for a number of years, he was able to interact with all kinds of important people. He actually had access to royalty within England and to high government officials and also to the intellectual community. And so Roger Williams talked to people who were growingly significant in the what we call the Enlightenment. And so there was an American influence that went over there, and then it came back with the Enlightenment as well. And they said there needs to be the separation, and Roger Williams said, we should have a hedge of separation between government and what he actually called, I believe, the wilderness of the world. And but he said the two should be kept. They should be kept separate. Church and state should be separate. And so the Enlightenment began to influence people here. Roger Williams had influenced people here, and by the time we come 150 or 160 years later to the Revolutionary War and to the founding of our Constitution, the approval of our Constitution, there was a recognition of the need for this separation. And so because of that, the Constitution does not mention God. The only mention of religion at all is just the idea that there will be no religious test. And it had moved a long way because the Christian nationalism that was brought by the Pilgrims did not work. But there are people who are trying strongly, and they are very highly positioned, and they're very organized, and they're working very hard to try to bring back that kind of Christian nationalism where everything should be based on the presupposition that, we were a Christian nation originally, and we should be a Christian nation still. And I happen to be a member of an organization called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, because I believe it's contrary to the spirit of what our founding fathers, and when I talk about the founding fathers, I'm talking about the ones who did the Constitution. As we move further past the Pilgrims, it's contrary to what they were trying to achieve. Okay, I have run out of time, and I haven't gotten to my second point, but maybe we can get into that in the questions. So anyway, I believe Christian nationalism is the most dangerous thing that's going on right now. That's and I say that as a Christian, and I want every person to have the same kind of rights that I do, not more and not less, just the same. Okay, we are ready. We are ready to move into questions, and I think there may be some roving mics here. We've got one over here. All you have to do is lift your hand. It's very simple. Just lift your hand, and you can ask a question, and you can direct it as you wish. It'll be simpler if you direct it to a specific person.
I'd like the panel's opinion about what are their thoughts about the green movement and climate change movement, whether they consider that a kind of religious movement. It seems to me that all the examples that you've talked about were examples of extremism in different religions. My second question is, I know there's been an opposition to teaching religion in school, but would there be opposition to teaching what kind of religions are out in the world? in order for us to understand other religions, the Muslim religion, for instance, there are so many differences in the Muslim religions that I don't think you can generally categorize them as one religion. The same way with religions of America. There are hundreds of different religions. I just bring that up. I wanted to hear what they said.
Okay, so we have two questions. First of all, is the Green Movement a religious movement, or potentially could be, and or not? And the second one is, what about religious education in schools, that is broad spectrum religious education, kind of more the world religions type approach? Okay, who wants to talk about the Green Movement?
So I love that question. And I would argue that it is part of the religious movement, that it is the obligation that we have to take care of the planet. In Tampa, my colleague who's the executive director of Hillel's down in what they call the Florida Sun Coast is actually leaving because he started an organization called Tikkun Hayam. So there's a Jewish value that is Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world. It's the idea that as Jews we are called to make the world a better place, and what that looks like includes things like environmentalism. And my colleague Rabbi Rosenthal says, well, we live here in Florida, and here in Florida the biggest resource we have and the biggest kind of opportunity to impact our planet revolves around the water. So he created Tikkun Hayam, which is repairing the seas. And the whole premise of Tikkun Hayam is that Jews have an obligation to repair the waters as much as we repair the land, and that goes back to the book of Genesis, when we talk about the early days of creation, and it says the essence of God hovers over the waters. So before there were people, there was water.
Thank you very much. David, were you wanting to
I was
speak?
only going to contrast the idea of dominionism, which is a concept I'm familiar with in Christianity, that God gave dominion to people from the same verse. So you have a Jewish perception of that verse as in taking care of the planet, whereas I think in some versions of Christianity, it's the planet is given to people by God. So that's an interesting contrast I just noted while you were talking.
And I would just say that dominionism, I think, often then extends further out to Christian nationalism. Okay, in other words, the two get interchanged quite a bit, I think. And because they take that same principle then, well, this is a Christian nation, this is our nation, therefore we have dominion over you, and we'll tell you what you're allowed to do and not do. Okay, coming over to this side, as far as the green, and then we'll get back to the idea of teaching in school.
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I would say if someone of any faith wants to join the Green Movement, I would encourage them, because we are, in the Islamic perspective, feel Earth is entrusted to us to take care of it, all its resources, what's in the water, what's in the air, what's on Earth, all plant life. We have a responsibility to care for it, develop it, protect it. Even in war, people should not be cutting down trees and should not be killing animals or, poisoning wells or water reservoirs. So there are overlaps between what the Green Movement advocates and what is in Islam. So if a Muslim is participating in it in a secular way, it's not a religious movement in my opinion, but like I said, I'm not very deep into it.
But I guess if your religion teaches that you need to care for the world, and there was an attempt to muzzle you from propagating that belief, then it would become a religious liberty issue.
Yeah, because it's the idea of defending the things that cannot defend themselves. Nature, the trees, the water, all of that, they don't have members in Congress. They don't have, power or armies to defend themselves. So if we, the humans, decide to destroy everything around us in nature, we can. And we have been doing that. So somebody has to stand up for the Amazon, somebody has to stand up for the clean air, somebody has to stand up for the fish in the water, and or for the honeybees, in the Midwest. And that is part of that religious sacred duty to stand with things that cannot defend themselves.
Thank you. Nav?
Yes, in Sikhism, Earth is looked at as Mother Earth, and it is our duty to basically be part of the healing process of it, not adding to its destruction. There's a Sikh organization called Eco-Sikh, and it's been doing a lot in terms of when it comes to the green movement in basically growing of trees and coming up with clean water systems, those kind of things. And so it is an important area for Sikhism as well.
Okay, there was second part to you had two questions. You have two.
Sorry, the reason why I asked the first question was there's a lot of extremism on the green movement and climate change people. I think that everybody's interested in clean water, clean air, living the great life on this earth. But what I'm driving at is there are groups of people who get in your face and shout you down to the point, like for instance in California, in a year or two, you're going to have to mow your grass with an electric mower or a push mower because they're going to abolish gasoline engines.
Okay. Obviously, there are people who would be pursuing some of these things because of their religion, and there are people who are pursuing it for other reasons. It could be political, it could be just common sense issues that we need to take care of our world. And so I think that it would be the kind of thing that could come under the rubric of religion, or it might not come under the rubric of religion. Okay, teaching religion in public schools. Obviously, private schools, you can teach whatever you'd like to teach. David?
So it sounds like you're not familiar with the fact that religions are taught in Florida public schools. Middle schools are learning about the three Abrahamic traditions and not much else, and that's a problem. So humanism is not taught, which, as we have not yet debated, might be the oldest, philosophy. But I think that if we have trouble getting sex ed and science taught properly, I don't know that religion is going to be given justice in public schools. But it is taught. Not well, I'm sure.
Okay, any other comment that anyone wanted to make on that?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. When it comes to public school education, we cannot be ignorant. The biggest problem that we have with people not recognizing a Sikh or a Muslim or anything else is to do with ignorance. And what would counter ignorance? Education. That is something that's really big. I remember going to school. I grew up in Malaysia and Singapore, not in India. I'm 3 generations removed. So we have the British system of education. And I remember when I was about 12 in grade school, that we actually had to learn about all the world religions, not as it was just as knowledge, as like, this is a Christian, this is what they believe in, this is a Muslim, this is what they believe in, this is what their practices are. Just very practical information. And it's just amazing. I was amazed at my classmates coming up to me and saying, gee, I didn't know about anything about Sikhism or whatever. So it's an eye-opener. It's something that we really have to do in the education system in this country. It is sorely lacking. It is very lacking, and it's something that's one of my missions is whenever I'm talking to anyone in the Department of Justice and anything else that involves education of law enforcement or TSA and all these people. And I said, you know what, if we just started this education in schools, there'll be there'll be so much less grief around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I second that. The idea is there's difference between education and proselytizing. The schools are not to be used for proselytizing for any religion, but any citizen of the world needs to be informed about what's going on in the world. And it's sad that we run into college students who know nothing about any world religion. Many of them, they don't know anything about their parents' religion. And that is not healthy, because the idea of let's make all religions disappear and that way people will become friends is not going to happen. But you teach people what's out there and let them choose, because they're going to find out anyway. The internet is going to be providing them sometimes with false understandings about other faith. And therefore, somehow there has to be a balance to empower and educate our children to know about each other's faith, but no proselytizing, no efforts to convert people there.
Okay, another question. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your insights today. Did want to ask a combination question. When David spoke, I heard specific references to instances that have occurred here in Central Florida. 3 or 4 actual examples where I believe the line of church and state was crossed. Did hear from the gentleman representing the Jewish faith, a 34% increase in anti-Semitism nationally. The other 2 gentlemen, I did hear about some international and more national instances. Are there any specific threats here or concerns to the Interfaith Council in Central Florida? And on a follow-up to that, regarding the instances that were mentioned by David, what does the Interfaith Council do to help enforce that line of separation of church and state?
Well, as far as what the Interfaith Council does, it's more education and trying to build understanding and a sense of broad community. And so we would advocate through op-eds in the newspaper or that kind of thing for certain issues of this nature if we felt that they needed to be addressed. And there certainly have been some instances of very concrete instances of Islamophobia and also anti-Semitism and also phobia against the Sikhs. And just not more than a couple of years ago, the Sikh president of the Sikh Society of Central Florida had his car in broad daylight parked in front of his house. Someone came and spray painted his car with graffiti that was obscene and very anti-Sikh, and that's never been solved. And there are we could cite all kinds of things like that, and the threats that come to Jewish properties. We helped sponsor, the Interfaith Council did a play kind of thing for Yom HaShoah, which is Kristallnacht. It was for Kristallnacht, the celebration of Kristallnacht, and the rabbi who participated with us in this, the next day her garage was spray painted with anti-Semitic things. That kind of thing does happen here a lot. And you mentioned the KKK. And the women, the Muslim women who walk down the street and have people shout at them and shout, rude remarks to them and so on because they're wearing a hijab. That happens. Okay, another question here.
There's a question that came in online. The Disinformation Governance Board is a United States Department of Homeland Security board announced on 4/2/22. Its aim is protecting national security by combating foreign misinformation and disinformation. How should we react?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, it's about the Disinformation Governance Board from the Department of Homeland Security that was just recently created at the beginning of this month. whose aim is, the committee's aim is protecting national security by combating foreign misinformation and disinformation. How should we react? I'm reading into that. Could that be a religious liberty issue?
Okay, and the word foreign was in there, foreign misinformation?
Yeah, combating foreign misinformation and
Okay.
disinformation.
You'd like to comment on that?
Well, I would say that we live in a world where we are cognizant that, say, Russia right now is trying to divide us at home politically. They have been for a number of years. And now as the war goes on in Europe, in Ukraine, they will use other tools, such as religious tools, and through social media try to promote misinformation that this group is saying that about that group. Say, the Christians are saying something about the Sikhs, or the Sikhs are saying something about the Jews, and then inflame based on misinformation, because their intelligence services are skilled at that. And they have done that in Ukraine. They have done that. I mean, they claim that the Ukrainians are Nazis and they want to free Ukraine from the Nazis. And that's obviously false there, but this is really dangerous territory. We are not prepared for it as a nation, because we have seen politically how they were able to divide us. And now they are not stopping at political, they're going to the social, religious realm to try to create divisions within us, and through false information. And I think that's organized. So I applaud the government for understanding the complexity of this and trying to come out. Every time that they detect there is a campaign on misinformation, that they should tell the public, no, this is not true, and give them the facts in order to prevent communities from starting to go at each other.
Okay. Any other comment? Okay, question back here.
Good evening, and thank you for sharing with us. So you mentioned ignorance being one of the single most deterrents or cause of misunderstanding each other, creating upsets. And we mentioned the possibility of teaching different religion in the school. And I know it's potentially a difficult issue in the sense that the question would be, are you trying to indoctrinate my child, versus are you just trying to make sure that our children have a good understanding of each other? So if we are to overcome then the ignorance, and if we are then to educate our children so we can live better together and avoid the misinformation and avoid the difficult experiences that you just mentioned with the 34% increase in anti-Semitism, how can we create a curriculum in our schools that would educate our children and, in a sense, quiet the discomfort that some of the parents will have on a human level? Should we start maybe at the high school level? Should it be a college course? What would be some of the practical recommendation based on your experiences would you offer us?
Okay, cutting off.
When it comes to world religions, education, that's already a college level course these days. I know that because I went to college here, and so those courses are already in there under the religious studies department. But what we need to do is start it earlier. I'm seeing it in some schools as well. I know that my kids went to high school here in Oviedo, and they actually had a class studying different faiths. That was at a high school level. So there are some schools that are doing that, but I think that it should be more of a formal education that's introduced, or curriculum that's introduced to all schools, because it should be a no-brainer. I mean, we learn about everything. We learn about economics, we learn about history, we learn about all these other things, agriculture, whatever, geography. Why not learn about each other? It's just common sense, and like Iman Musri was saying, it doesn't have to be religious education. It's just knowing your neighbor. It's key. And I think that if all of us made efforts at whatever school level or wherever we are, that would be a starting point to approach, the school boards and whatnot, and have them, talk to them about the importance of it, and have them do something with that and go from there.
I think David wants to speak, and I actually have a degree in religion from a public university in the state of Florida. And the thing that I always commended my professors on, and obviously this was at the college level, the collegiate level, so it's much different than teaching in the middle schools like David was talking about, was the idea that you can look at world traditions and you can look at world religions as sort of a historical narrative, or as sort of a sociological course. But the thing that I struggle with, and I think this is a great question, I'm glad it came up twice, is how do you teach things like classical art and classical music? And when you think about the Renaissance, all of that was most of that was influenced by religious institutions. So I think the topic of teaching religion in schools is a good topic, and one that I wonder if we might see movement in a more accepting and more knowledgeable direction on. But to anticipate what I think David's about to object to, I worry about who's going to teach it.
Yeah, only the atheists can teach all the religions very well.
Do it.
Right? So, as I said
You're
before,
going to give equal mistreatment to all of them, huh?
So, as I said before, all middle schools in Florida teach world religions. I suspect that, through our gerrymandered government and recent laws, you can opt your kids out of pretty much anything, including that. And there's been Christians that have had problems with the fact that Islam is even mentioned in these texts. So, as I said, the Abrahamic traditions are in there, and we had objections raised by atheists that were concerned about any religious teaching, and I evaluated everything that I could without spending a lot of money on records requests, and I don't see anything in there objectionable other than the missing religions, which I didn't even bother to count because there really is a preference to the traditions. But if we didn't have a gerrymandered Florida legislature, we might pass some laws about teaching things that we could do without the kind of stuff that's happened recently. So in the last couple of years, there's been efforts to put the Ten Commandments and Christian superiority into our public education. And I am not exaggerating. I'm not going to go into this now. However, we have written and worked with national organizations to try to fight the efforts to push Christian superiority into your children's education by this gerrymandered legislature. So the root cause is voting, but there's a long road between voting and teaching kids what they need to know properly.
And I would just make a comment that it is the implementation of that kind of program is very difficult because who's going to teach it? That's one thing. Do I want Christianity presented by an atheist or a Muslim or a Sikh or a Jew? Can they do justice to it? That's one issue. But another thing is that there will be things that come out that the kids pick up on, and everyone's sacred is somebody else's stupid. Okay, and if this is not handled very carefully, okay, it can actually create opportunities for kids to be picked on, and it will be the minority religions who are the ones who are most likely to get picked on, and or the absence of religion, whichever. But those all come into this big complicated equation when we look at how's the best way to implement that kind of thing.
Jim, just a question for you or anybody on the panel to comment on. What is the role of government in this? Because David and others have talked about individual acts of unkindness and hate crimes, which are illegal. And to my mind, those are distinguished from governmental actions or inactions. I come at this from a Christian perspective, and I think people in the Christian community have a schizophrenic view of government. There's part of the community that is very afraid the government is about to wipe out Christianity or crush their Christian culture, and they're suspicious of anything the government does. This disinformation question illustrates that. There's been quite an uproar in the last few days about, is this an attempt by the government, Big Brother, to control us? On the other hand, we get mad at the government because it's not doing enough to promote Christianity. So we wish the government would do more. On the one hand, we're afraid of it. On the other hand, some of us seem to think it's not doing enough. So I'd just be interested in the perspective, particularly since your panel, except for yourself, is non-Christian. What should the government be doing or not doing in this space?
I'll just make a quick comment, and that is that we can only legislate good behavior or good interpersonal relationships to a certain degree. It's going to be very hard to have it so tightly legislated that you can't say anything offensive to anybody. That's a problem. We need to be taught to have discretion ourselves. Somehow we as a nation need to learn to have discretion and know that there are times we should keep our mouths shut. And if we are going to open our mouth, at least say it kindly and kind of golden rule type stuff. But it is a challenge. So, answers here. What's the role of government in cleaning these things up?
I think I need a hypothetical or an actual example to better answer the question, and I look forward to perhaps talking with you about that. I just want to read a quote. When a religion is good, I conceive it will support itself. And when it does not support itself and God does not take care to support it so that its professors are obliged to call for help of a civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one. And that's Benjamin Franklin. And I think of that a lot. And I don't think religion is bad if it doesn't do a good enough job of getting help and calls on the government. But I think the people that ask for the government to do anything for religion other than treat it like everything else that we treat is asking too much. In fact, I'm surprised sometimes how people expect government to give special treatment to religion in some cases and treat it equally in others. That seems hypocritical to me.
Okay. Any other comment? Yes, Nav.
To just touch base on the discussion earlier, you're talking about the role of government, and what I think the role of government should be is to support and provide a liberal education, strictly very academic. This is a frog, this is where it lives, this is what it feeds on, that kind of information only. And I think that those kind of things are important, once again, to educate people so that, we understand each other's, we understand our neighbors a lot better. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. Someone else had their hand. Bob.
Okay. I notice over my lifetime, and some surveys have borne this out, that with each successive generation in America, our youth are rejecting religion progressively, and now it's less than half of our young people are espousing, a religion, a personal religion. So I wondered what you all think, how that impacts our society and the future of our, religious traditions. And also, we know countries in the past who have done this to their detriment.
When you say countries have done this, what specifically are you saying that they did? Did they try to prop up religion, or did they?
The countries, there have been countries in the past in history that have rejected, basically rejected religion ultimately to their detriment.
Okay. So, any comment? David?
I think the countries that rejected religion are extremely opposite of the United States, where we embrace religion. So I would not think that communist China or atheist Russia would be good comparisons to the United States. I'm not sure of other examples, but I'd love to entertain them.
I think to the first point, though, about lower levels of religious identity among younger people, I think it's an interesting question. And it was almost what I talked about when I first opened, because it's a big conversation that the Jewish community is having now. And really the conversation isn't lower Jewish identity, it's assimilation. So what does it mean to live in Central Florida, where we just did a study of the Jewish community, and we found that previously we thought there were 30,000 Jews in Orlando. There's actually close to 50,000. So there's 50,000 Jews in Orlando, and less than 10% of the community affiliates in any sort of meaningful capacity. And the conversations we're having is, why is that, and what is it about the community that is not attracting people to engage with the broader community? Because we also know from these surveys that even if you are raised in a Jewish community and you light Shabbat candles every single Friday, or you celebrate Passover every single year, it doesn't mean that you are going to affiliate with the rest of the community. And I think, and my answer, and people hate when I give this answer, and I think the reason people aren't engaging is because we're not giving them something to engage with. So I happen to be a Reformed Jew. Reform in that sense is, it's an action. We are constantly reforming. And I think that this is the conversation of why people aren't, or the conversation about people not engaging is not the conversation. The conversation is why, and what we can do to bring them in.
I think we need to separate between, say, church attendance or mosque attendance, temple attendance, and if people are really living or practicing that faith. In a traditional way, we count or think of if the religion is maintaining its power in the community by the pews are full and the young people are engaged and they're participating in every activity. But we live in a time that we have transitioned to everything being online, everything being different. We shop differently. We pay for things differently. We get the news differently. I don't see anybody now holding a newspaper and reading it. Some kids look in the movies and see somebody holding a newspaper. What is that? That's how you have your news. If you look at the ratings of most news channels, they are less than some kid's YouTube channel. They spend billions, and yet this one kid come up with a video and everybody is on his channel. So things have changed, and religion is part of these things, that how religion is delivered. We have tendency to think about our institutions, the buildings, the institutions, the organizations, as the religion. It's not. I would say if Jesus comes now, he probably is not going to be coming to the church because he's not used to the systems we have developed over centuries and these bureaucracies and these organizations. Probably he would choose to go among the people to preach his message of love without needing people to be here. He walked on the streets. And we defend institutions. These institutions gonna, go away. The future is not the same as the past. And religious organizations that are dynamic and can realize how to deliver the information and the faith perspective to people, to the youth where they are, they're going to keep with them. And those organizations that insist on traditional ways, they're going to be out of business, simply. And right now, the youth, they get their information 24/7 on their personal device, right? They don't wait for Sunday to show up to the church, to hear from the pastor what's going on in the world. That's simply not anymore. So if I, as a faith leader, want to engage the youth, as Sam said, deliver something they want and something that touches their lives every day. They have questions every day. And there are, religious leaders who are very active online with millions of followers. And the youth who follow them, they are really engaged. And they go out and do marvelous things out there in the world, implementing their faith. But we have to, because like the Pew Research Center, they do these surveys every year about the numbers and how people, and they see this decline in many religions. And I think the survey designed incorrectly to begin with. They shouldn't be asking these questions. How many times do you attend church?
I would just mention that historically we've gone through some major convulsions repeatedly. Okay, so the Reformation was a convulsion where there had been a stable way of doing things. And you had the Catholic Church there and all the people living around it, and now we fragment it and we put it into all these different things, and we say the institution no longer has the answer, but this book has the answer. And so you go to the book to get the answer. And so everything gets reformulated, and the world falls apart a bit. But then it restructures, regroups, and we kind of move ahead. And then we get to the point where, we have a place called the United States of America that emerged. And it did things differently from the way it had been done before. It was an iconoclastic movement, and it upset the equilibrium of the world. And then we move forward, further, and now we get the advent of radio, we get the advent of television, we get the advent of the internet, and it all happens much faster than it used to. So we don't regroup and we don't resettle and get into a new pattern. It's not just religion that's being rejected. If you look at the belief in the Supreme Court, compared to what it was, nothing like the same. Look at the belief in government, in the Congress. It's down low. And so I think it's a phenomenon that is not unique to religion. It is a phenomenon that's going on in all kinds of directions, and we're moving fast, and we just can't make that change that fast.
I also don't think it's a rejection of religion, though.
No.
I think it's a rejection of this religion right now. I think that so I'm addicted to TikTok. If you have never used it, it's amazing. And one of the amazing movements that you'll find on there are people who are going through the deconstructive phase of their religion. So they grew up in some sort of fundamentalist belief system, and now that they're sort of young adults, they can actually they're starting to decide what's important to them. And it's an interesting conversation to hear them talk, or to listen to them talk, not a conversation. Because it's interesting to hear people talk about how the religion that they grew up with does not affect their spirituality now, but that doesn't mean that they're not spiritual or religious.
Okay, and the authority figures change with time, and the power those authority figures have. Okay, I think we're running out of time. Was there one more question? One more question. Les, you've got the final question here.
Well, we've heard several examples, and we know of more of hostile situations. And we all know that what we really want is to lower the temperature. And we've talked about education. Can you give us more specifics on how to lower the temperature?
I would venture to say the whole idea behind the Interfaith Council here in Central Florida was, one part is education, one part is putting together events like this, mixed events, because usually the same, people attend the same church, but they don't get other people to. We had events that we traveled, faith leaders, and not just the faith leaders, but the communities with them. Their communities traveled from a church to a synagogue to a mosque to a temple, and we live in the same community. We share everything else out there, we need to open our doors and get to know our neighbors and love our neighbors as ourselves, the second commandment. And then we will see that, wow, we have so much in common. And we can move from tolerating each other to respecting each other. So it's a part of that education through social events, through, like we worked on building homes for Habitat that crews from the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Christian community, they're all working together to build a common goal, something concrete. Planting trees, taking the youth to plant trees in downtown Winter Park. And so when you do a series of events like this, it goes beyond, we don't spend time talking about theology and our differences. We look at what we have in common and how we can solve our common problems together. And we develop these lifetime relationships of love and respect as neighbors. And we can disagree theologically, but we can agree on so much otherwise.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Imam Musri just said, which is when you get to know your neighbor, it's hard to hate them.
Yeah.
When you get to know your neighbor, it's hard.
Go ahead.
That's a great point, and it relates to what I'm going to say, which is get to know more people that are different than you in the areas that are most important to you, but not on the internet.
Anything?
That was the end.
No,
of it.
yeah, that was it. I
that was the
agree.
comment.
Like,
Okay, very
that
good.
was all excellent.
I really do believe that it's getting to know people as people that makes all the difference. And I can't say I've gotten rid of all my bigotries. They're still there. But people I have gotten to know, and clusters of people, groups of people, labels, the more I've interacted with them, the more the hostility and the bigotry disappears. And the more comfortable everything becomes. So it's getting to know people, not just ideas, but getting to know people. And David, I'll just tell how you and I happened to get acquainted. I'd written something for the newspaper. He read it. Jocelyn and his wife said, you should talk to that guy. You may have a little bit in common. And so what did he do? He called me up, took me out to eat. Hey, I like free food. And that's how the relationship gets started. It's, no hostility, no animosity. We're obviously coming from radically different perspectives, but there is some overlap. And, he's a great guy. His wife's a great person, and he thinks so too. Anyway, but it's that kind of thing. Then now suddenly, atheists in general are not nearly as intimidating to me as they was before I met David. And it's just one person. And I just memorized a poem last week, and it said, sometimes all it takes is a single lit candle in the darkness to start a movement that stretches from one horizon to the next. And I think that it's getting to know people one-on-one is a huge thing, because the one person you know will ripple out to where you love a lot more people. Gary, do you want to wind us up here? And thank you so much. I want to say on my behalf, and I think on behalf of all of our panelists, it's been great to be here with you. I thank you. And it would be wonderful if more churches, more houses of worship, would ask these kind of questions and say, how can we move ahead more effectively? Thank you very much.
I just want to express the thanks to all of you again. Unfortunately, the time gets away from us. There were many questions I wanted to ask myself. But if nothing else, I can express one of the things that I came away from that all of you said is we need to understand how to be communities and still be a part of a community. And I appreciate all the perspective that you gave. For those of you that asked questions, I appreciate your involvement this evening. And we thank you for coming out, those of you that participated online as well. And without even talking with Doug, I'd like to say, hey, if we get the opportunity to do this again, I would very much appreciate it. I think getting together like this being the first opportunity to hear multiple views from multiple faiths has been a great opportunity for us, and there's much more to discuss. So with that, let's close with another prayer, if you would, and then we'll be dismissed. Our Father, again, we thank you that we could come together, share viewpoints that we may not appreciate, or have taken the time, I should say, to understand and realize how we may be impacting others just out of our unawareness of what may be about us. We pray that you'll give us a mindset to consider how our faith affects others and how we need to understand each other better. We pray these things in your name, amen. Thank you again.